Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today's topic is, well, it's a little intense. We're going to be diving into the world of how technology and warfare and psychology all kind of like intertwines.
Yeah.
We've got, a ton of YouTube videos and transcripts all hinting at how easily our minds can be influenced, sometimes without us even realizing it.
Absolutely. And, it's surprising how much of this information is just out there,
Right.
in the open. If you just know where to look.
Right.
We've got, we're going to be diving into some videos today from the University of California Television, the Manila Times, even a DEF CON talk about the FBI.
Oh, wow.
And we've even got some videos on PSYOPs.
Okay.
Psychological operations from some sources like the U.S. Army Recruiting Channel. So a lot to unpack.
PSYOPs, that's some serious stuff. So, okay, before we go full on, conspiracy theory here.
Right.
What are we hoping to learn from all of this?
Sure, yeah. The goal today is to really understand how these psychological techniques that we're talking about have kind of evolved throughout history.
Yeah.
And really what role technology plays, in all this. And then, the implications of all of it.
Right.
We're going to uncover how these tactics have been used.
Okay.
By governments and militaries, and then, what that means for us.
Yeah.
In today's world.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we can't really escape technology. It's everywhere, so.
It is. It's pervasive.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so there was this UCTV video
Okay.
on the history of psychological terror that really caught my attention.
Right.
It goes into how the CIA back in the 50s and 60s, was conducting all this secret research.
Oh, yeah.
And they were, it's like they were trying to crack the code of the human mind.
Yeah. They actually called it the Manhattan Project of the Mind.
Wow.
They were looking at, how to really understand manipulation to the point where they could influence, people's thoughts, people's beliefs, even how they perceive reality.
Oh, wow.
Really powerful stuff.
Yeah. That's getting into some scary territory. And here's where it gets even weirder.
Okay.
They documented all of this, all their research in these manuals, the Kubark manual.
Right.
And the Human Resources Exploitation Manual. And here's the thing, these are available online.
That's right.
Anyone can find them.
Yeah.
Just Google it. Why is that? Why are they just out there?
It definitely raises questions about transparency and how accessible this information is.
Yeah.
You would think this would be locked away somewhere, top secret, but no, it's just out there for anyone to see.
Didn't the U.S. ratify the UN Convention Against Torture?
They did, yes.
So how can they condemn torture on the one hand while actively developing all these psychological techniques? It doesn't really make sense.
Well, the thing is, when the U.S. ratified that convention,
okay,
they included very specific language that actually exempted the CIA's psychological torture methods.
What?
Essentially, they just redefined torture to exclude things like sensory deprivation,
right,
or, self-inflicted pain, which were the very tactics that they'd been, honing for years.
That's a loophole.
It is. It's a big loophole.
Yeah. So, okay, how does this all relate to modern warfare? Are we still using these types of techniques today?
We are, absolutely. And that's where we get to the concept of what's called cognitive warfare.
Okay.
Dr. Lloyd from that Manila Times video that you sent over,
right,
he defines it as, basically using various techniques to influence people's minds, to kind of weaken their resolve and ultimately control the narrative.
So it's like a war, but it's fought in the mind.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And with social media, it's it feels like it's easier than ever to manipulate information and people's perceptions of things. We're constantly just bombarded with all this news and opinions, and it's who knows what else is in there. It's almost impossible to kind of sift through it all.
You're absolutely right. Social media has become a really powerful tool in cognitive warfare.
Right.
It allows the spread of misinformation and propaganda to a huge audience.
Right.
And it's like a whole new battleground.
Yeah.
For influencing hearts and minds.
Okay. Let's talk about that DEF CON presentation. The one on the FBI's Enam operation.
Right.
It was something straight out of a spy movie,
Yeah.
They actually created this fake encrypted phone company called Enom and then marketed it directly to criminals.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And the Enom case is a fascinating example of how law enforcement is really kind of like embracing these new technologies and using psychology to infiltrate these criminal networks.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see how they designed these Anom phones to appeal to criminals.
Right. It's crazy they were using like profile pictures of Edward Snowden.
I know.
And El Chapo's son on these phones.
Right.
It's like they wanted to, I don't know, like be in this exclusive club or something.
Yeah, and it really shows the psychology behind it.
Yeah.
You know, like the FBI understood, they did their research, and they understood the psychology of, you know, these criminals, their desire for privacy and security and feeling like they're part of something exclusive.
Right.
By tapping into that, they were able to gain their trust.
Right.
And ultimately, you know, bring them down.
That's brilliant. But it's also like kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
You wonder what other ways our desires and fears are being like exploited.
Right.
That we don't even know about.
Right. And that's a really good question to think about. If law enforcement is using these tactics, what's stopping other groups? You know, with maybe less noble intentions.
Yeah.
But before we go down that rabbit hole too far, let's talk about another type of psychological operation that I think is often surrounded by a lot of controversy, and that's PSYOPs.
Right.
We've got a few different videos here from the U.S. Army, Life is a Special Operation, even a local news channel.
Okay.
They all offer kind of different perspectives.
Right.
On, you know, what PSYOPs are and how they're used.
So, okay. Break it down for me. What are PSYOPs exactly? And like how are they different from what we've been talking about with like CIA research and cognitive warfare?
So PSYOPs are psychological operations. They're planned operations that use communication to influence audiences.
Okay.
And they can target, you know, emotions, motives, reasoning, and ultimately behaviors.
Right.
Now, while they might sound kind of similar to what we've already talked about, PSYOPs aren't always about deception or spreading misinformation.
Oh, really? Okay. I've always thought of PSYOPs as like, you know, propaganda.
Right.
Like spreading lies and you know, that kind of thing.
That's a really common misconception.
Oh, okay.
They can be used for a variety of different purposes.
Okay.
And actually, some of the sources that you sent over highlighted how they're used for humanitarian efforts as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like, for example, they can be used to convey, you know, vital information during disaster relief.
Right.
Or, you know, to promote peace and stability in conflict zones.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So it's more like it's about strategic communication.
Exactly.
To achieve like a specific goal.
Exactly.
Whether that's influencing public opinion or actually like, you know, helping people in need.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Okay.
And to be effective, you know, PSYOPs, soldiers, they need a really like unique set of skills.
Yeah.
We've got this video here from the 8th PSYOP group that goes into the qualifications.
Oh, okay.
And the selection process.
Okay.
And it really emphasizes the mental and physical demands of the job. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, you have to be, I imagine, like really adaptable, resourceful, you know, work well under pressure.
Absolutely.
It's probably really stressful.
Yeah, very high stress.
But it can't just be about, you know, being tough.
Right.
There's got to be like a huge ethical component
to
this kind of work.
Yeah, they operate in a very like complex moral landscape. They have to be able to use their skills responsibly, even when faced with, you know, really difficult choices.
Right.
It's a heavy burden to carry, knowing that your actions can have like a really profound impact on, you know, people's lives.
That brings up a really important point, which is the psychology of dehumanizing the enemy.
Yeah.
We have a video here from In Human Form Psychology. Right. And talks about the Milgram experiment. I mean, that's incredibly relevant, I think, to this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. The Milgram experiment was groundbreaking for social psychology. Yeah. And it showed how readily people obey authority figures.
Right.
Even when they're asked to do things that go against their conscience.
Yeah.
It's a chilling insight into human nature.
It is.
And the capacity for obedience.
Right.
Even to the point of inflicting harm.
Yeah. I remember learning about that in school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. They were told that they were administering electric shocks to another person. And despite hearing like screams and protests,
Right.
a lot of them continued
Yeah.
to increase the voltage.
Wow.
Simply because the experimenter told them to.
It's scary how easily we can be influenced
It is, yeah.
by authority. And, the video actually connects this to the tactics that are used to dehumanize enemies during war.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They show interviews with Vietnam War veterans
Okay.
who describe how they were trained to view the enemy as, like, less than human,
Right.
which made it easier to justify killing them.
I mean, that's heartbreaking.
It is. It's heartbreaking.
But it's eye-opening, too. It's
Yeah.
like it shows how psychological manipulation can be used to overcome our natural aversion to violence.
Absolutely. It's like creating this mental barrier
Yeah.
that allows us to detach
Yeah.
from, like, the moral implications of our actions.
Right.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. Dehumanization, it's a powerful tool. And it's not just warfare.
Right.
It happens, we see it in all sorts of contexts, like, racism and prejudice and online bullying, It's a problem that we need to be aware of and actively combat.
I agree.
So, I mean, if we're constantly just bombarded with all these messages and, these tactics that are designed to influence us, how do we protect ourselves?
That's a great question.
It feels like we're fighting like a losing battle
Right.
against these forces we don't even fully understand.
That's like an invisible enemy.
Yeah.
But that's where our understanding of these tactics is so crucial.
Okay.
The more we know, the better equipped we are to recognize when it's happening
Right.
and resist it.
Okay.
It's all about building up, kind of our mental defenses.
So it's like a mental martial art.
It is, yeah.
You learn the moves so you can block them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Learn the moves, block the attacks.
Okay. But I mean, most of us aren't going to become like, PSYOP's experts overnight.
Right.
So what are some like practical things that we can do to kind of start becoming more discerning?
Well, one thing that
Yeah.
that Hughes talks about a lot is building awareness of your own emotional state.
Okay.
Pay attention to how you feel
Okay.
when you're interacting with others.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel pressured or manipulated?
Okay.
And if so, like, why? Can you pinpoint, like, what tactics are being used?
So step one is like self-awareness.
Exactly.
Okay. Tuning into, how we respond to certain situations and try to understand like why we're responding that way.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Don't just accept information at face value.
Okay.
Question everything.
Question everything.
Ask yourself, where is this information coming from?
Yep.
What's the agenda behind it? Who benefits if I believe this?
Right.
This is especially important today with all of the information that we're bombarded with online.
Right. Yeah. It's like we're drowning in information.
We are.
And like not all of it's like clean water. We need to figure out how to like filter out
Absolutely.
the toxins,
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
We need to develop those critical thinking skills. Don't just react emotionally.
Right.
Take a step back.
Right.
Analyze the situation.
Right.
Look at it from different angles.
Okay.
And then make an informed decision. It's like you said, becoming more mindful,
Mm-hmm.
both of our own internal states
Right.
and the information that we're taking in.
Right.
It's about making intentional choices rather than just going with the flow.
I like that. Okay. I mean, this all makes sense.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, I'm still a little, uneasy
Okay.
about this whole idea of manipulating people.
Right.
Even if it's, for a good cause, it feels a little, I don't know.
Yeah, it's an understandable concern.
Yeah.
And, while Hughes does emphasize the positive applications of these techniques, he doesn't shy away from the ethical complexities.
Right.
It's, it's a slippery slope.
It is. Yeah.
And there's always the potential for good intentions to kind of go awry.
Right. Right. Yeah, it raises some huge questions, ethical questions.
Good questions.
Yeah, like how do we ensure that these techniques are being used responsibly?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where do we draw the line between persuasion and manipulation?
That's the question.
Who decides what crosses a line?
Right, where's the line?
Yeah.
It's a blurry line sometimes.
It is, yeah.
And, one of the things that really struck me in all the material that you sent over
Okay.
was this idea that, like, we're all vulnerable to these tactics.
Okay.
To some extent. We all have those primal instincts that can be exploited.
So it's not as simple as like good guys versus bad guys.
No, it's not.
It's more nuanced than
It's
that.
much more nuanced.
We all have the capacity
Right.
to be both manipulated and the manipulator.
We do.
So how do we create a world where these techniques are used for good?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think it starts with education.
Okay.
The more people understand how these tactics work, the less effective they'll be when they're used unethically.
Yeah.
But education alone, I don't think, is enough.
Right.
We need to have open and honest conversations about the ethics of all of this.
Right.
I
agree. And I think we need to think bigger than just individual awareness.
Right.
We need to have regulations and safeguards to make sure that these tools aren't being used to exploit people.
Absolutely. I completely agree. This is a global issue.
Yeah.
And it needs a global response.
Yeah.
This technology, it's evolving so rapidly.
Right.
And it's being used in so many contexts.
Yeah.
From marketing and advertising to, politics and warfare. We need to be talking about this on a worldwide scale.
Yeah. I mean, that's a daunting task.
It is.
But it feels like, I don't know, the stakes are so high.
The stakes are very high.
Yeah. It feels like we're at a crossroads.
I think so too.
The future of our society might depend on our ability to use these technologies wisely.
Yeah, I think now's a good time to maybe shift our focus to some real world examples of how these techniques are being used.
Okay.
Both ethically and unethically.
Right.
Because, I think seeing how this plays out in real life might help us to better understand the challenges that we face.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. Let's get into some examples and see what we can learn.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So before we went to break, we were starting to talk about Chase Hughes and his ideas about influence and persuasion, all that stuff with the mammalian brain.
Yeah, that whole mammalian brain thing, it really got me thinking. I mean, it sounds a little, technical. Can you break it down for us? What exactly is he talking about?
Hughes argues that if you want to really influence someone, you got to go beyond just logic and reason. You got to tap into their primal instincts.
Okay.
Those parts of the brain that are responsible for survival and emotional responses.
Okay.
So think of it as the part of us that reacts before we even have time to think.
So are you saying we're all just walking around with these hidden buttons?
Yeah.
That can be pushed to make us do things? That's a little creepy.
It is. And Hughes, he doesn't shy away from that.
Okay.
He talks about techniques like, reframing beliefs and establishing rapport and even subtly manipulating body language.
Wow.
To trigger specific responses in that primal part of the brain.
Now I'm really seeing how this could be powerful.
Yeah.
But also really dangerous if it gets into the wrong hands.
Absolutely. You're right on the money. Hughes, he's walking a tightrope here.
Yeah.
He's out there talking about all these techniques, but he's also, he's really emphasizing how important it is to use them ethically and responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
He believes they could be used for positive change, helping people overcome anxieties and things like that, breaking bad habits.
Okay.
But, there's always that potential for misuse.
So it's this mammalian brain hacking.
Right.
It's a tool that could be used for good or for evil, you know?
It is. It all comes down to intention,
Yeah. So how do we protect ourselves from, the bad guys? How do we avoid being manipulated by people with bad intentions?
Well, I think it's not about becoming paranoid. It's about becoming aware.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
The more we understand how these tactics work,
right,
the harder it is for someone to use them against us without us knowing.
Right.
It's like putting on armor, It's about building up those mental defenses.
Okay. So it's like mental martial arts, learn the moves so you can block them.
Exactly.
But most of us aren't going to, be psyops experts.
Right.
So what are some things that everyday people can do,
sure,
to be more discerning in their daily lives? What can we actually do?
Well, Hughes talks a lot about this idea of building awareness of your own emotional state.
Okay.
So pay attention, right, to how you feel when you're interacting with other people.
Okay.
Do you ever feel pressured, manipulated? If so, why? Can you pinpoint the tactics that they're using?
Okay, so step one is basically just becoming more self-aware.
Yeah.
Tuning into how we respond to things.
Right.
And trying to understand why.
Exactly.
Okay, so what else can we do? What else can we do to kind of protect ourselves?
Don't just accept information at face value.
Okay.
Question everything.
Question everything.
Ask yourself, where is this information coming from?
Mm-hmm.
What's the agenda behind it? Who benefits if I believe this?
Right.
This is so important these days, especially with so much information online.
We're drowning in it, and not all of it's like, good information. It's
Yes.
like we have to figure out how to filter out the junk.
Absolutely. It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Developing those critical thinking skills. And don't just react emotionally, Take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
Analyze the situation. Look at it from different angles.
Okay.
And then make an informed decision.
Okay. So we're talking about being more mindful, both of our own internal states and the information that we're taking in, and just being more intentional about the choices that we're making.
Absolutely.
Not just going with the flow,
Right.
Okay, this all makes sense, but I got to admit, I'm still a little uneasy about this whole idea of manipulating people, even if it is for a good cause.
Yeah.
It feels wrong.
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It is. And, even though Hughes emphasizes the positive uses of these techniques,
right,
he doesn't shy away from the fact that it's tricky ethically.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope. There's always the potential for things to go wrong, even with good intentions.
Yeah, that raises some big questions, some ethical questions.
Big questions. Big questions.
Like, how do we make sure that this stuff is being used responsibly? Where do we draw the line between persuasion and manipulation?
Right.
And who gets to decide what crosses the line?
Right. Who gets to decide? That's the question.
Yeah, it's a blurry line sometimes,
It's very blurry.
One thing that stood out to me in the research that we looked at was this idea that we're all vulnerable to this stuff.
We are. We
all have those primal instincts that can be, exploited.
That's right.
So it's not as simple as good guys versus bad guys.
No, not at all.
It's way more nuanced.
It's much more nuanced.
We all have the potential to be both the manipulator and the manipulated.
Absolutely.
So like how do we even begin to create a world where this stuff is used for good?
That's the $1 million question. That's the question we're all trying to figure out.
Right.
Well, I think it starts with education, right?
Okay.
I mean, the more people understand how these things work, the less effective they're going to be when they're used unethically.
Okay, so knowledge is power.
It is.
Okay.
But I don't think education alone is enough.
Okay.
We need to really have these open and honest conversations about the ethics of all of this.
Yeah.
We have to talk about it.
We do.
And I think we need to think bigger than just individual awareness.
Absolutely.
We need regulations. We need safeguards in place to make sure that these powerful tools aren't being used to exploit people.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%. This is a global issue, and it needs a global response.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this technology is evolving at an incredible pace.
Right.
It's being used in so many different contexts, from, marketing and advertising to politics and warfare.
Yeah.
We need to be having this conversation on a worldwide scale.
Yeah. That's a pretty daunting task.
It is a daunting task.
But it feels like the stakes are really high.
The stakes are high.
Like the future of our society could depend on, on how we use these technologies.
Yeah. And I think now is a good time to maybe shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And look at some real world examples of how these techniques are actually being used. Some ethical examples, some unethical examples.
I think seeing how this all plays out in real life can help us understand the challenges better.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's dive into those examples and see what we can learn.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've talked a lot about theories and, big picture stuff, but I want to see how this all plays out in the real world. Like, where are these techniques actually being used, and how can we spot them in action?
Well, one of the most obvious places is marketing and advertising. I mean, think about it. Companies are constantly competing for our attention.
Yeah.
They're trying to persuade us to buy their products. All those targeted ads you see online.
Yeah.
It's no coincidence those shoes you were looking at online suddenly show up in your social media feed later that day.
It's true. It's like they can read our minds. It is kind of creepy. How do they do it? How do they target us so precisely?
It all comes down to data collection and algorithms.
Right.
I mean, companies are gathering tons of information about what we do online. Everything from our browsing history to our social media likes, it's all being analyzed to create those personalized ads.
So they're basically using our own data against us, figuring out how to push our buttons to make us buy more stuff.
Yeah, in a way. They're trying to figure out what makes us tick, what we want, what we're afraid of. Then they craft these messages that are designed to well, to trigger those emotional responses.
Makes sense from a business standpoint, I guess, but is it ethical? Is it okay for companies to be using our data against us like that?
That's a tough question. A lot of people think as long as companies are upfront about what they're collecting and, give people a choice to opt out, then it's fair game. But others argue that this kind of personalized advertising is just inherently manipulative. They think we need stricter rules to protect our privacy.
Yeah, it's tricky. I like seeing ads that are actually relevant to me, but it feels kind of icky sometimes too, like someone's peering into my brain, trying to get me to buy something I didn't even know I wanted.
It raises some big questions about free will, right? I mean, are we really in control of our choices? Or are we just being nudged in certain directions by all these algorithms?
It's like that whole thing about social media filter bubbles. Are we just seeing what we want to see, reinforcing our biases, and becoming more, I don't know, susceptible to manipulation?
It's definitely a concern. And it's not just in marketing and advertising. We see these same tactics playing out in politics. Think about how social media is used to spread fake news and, create division.
Oh, yeah. It's scary how much fake news is out there. Sometimes it's impossible to tell what's real and what's not. Feels like everyone's trying to spin things their own way.
That's why critical thinking is so important. We have to be skeptical, especially with stuff we see online. Don't take everything at face value. Do your own research. Check the sources. Think about who's saying it and why.
So we have to be our own fact checkers now.
Pretty much. We can't just passively take in whatever information's thrown at us. We have to be active, question everything, and think critically about what we're seeing.
Okay, so we've talked about marketing, advertising, and politics. Where else are these psychological techniques being used?
Well, those sources you said also talk about how this stuff is used in warfare, especially PSYOPs.
Right.
We've seen examples of this throughout history, but with technology and social media, these operations are becoming even more sophisticated.
That DEF CON presentation with the FBI and the NM phones, that was a really interesting example. They basically tricked criminals into using a phone that let the FBI spy on them.
Exactly. The NM case shows the potential benefits of these techniques when used ethically and for the right reasons. But it also shows how they can be misused and how there's potential for them to go too far.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. Like, where do we draw the line between legitimate surveillance and invading people's privacy? It's a tough question.
It is, and governments all over the world are struggling with that question right now. Yeah. Technology makes it so much easier to track what people are doing, both on and offline. We need to be having these conversations about security and freedom and how to find that balance.
Classic dilemma. We all want to be safe, but we don't want to give up our freedoms. It's like trying to square a circle.
And it's not just government surveillance we need to think about. It's private companies, too. All the data they collect on us, how they use it. We leave a trail everywhere we go online and in the real world.
It's like we're always being watched, even in our own homes. Makes you think twice about what you do online.
Exactly. We need to know what data's out there, who has it, what they're doing with it, and we need to fight for our privacy and push back against anyone who tries to take away our digital freedoms.
Whoa. This deep dive has been intense. I feel like we've gone down so many rabbit holes. Psychological warfare, cognitive warfare, the mammalian brain, ethics, manipulation, it's a lot.
It is. It's a lot to process. But the important thing is that we're paying attention now. The more we understand about how our minds work, how these techniques are being used, the better prepared we'll be to deal with all of it.
So what's the takeaway here? What do we do with all this? Where do we go from here?
I think it's about being more aware, more discerning. Question everything. Know your biases. Don't be afraid to challenge things.
So don't just sit back and let things happen. We have to be active and involved.
Exactly. Don't just consume information, question it.
I like that. So the deep dive continues, right?
Always. It never really ends. Keep learning, keep exploring, keep asking questions. There's always more to uncover.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been amazing.
My pleasure. And remember, there's a lot of information out there, good and bad. It's up to us to figure it out, to find the truth, and to use that knowledge wisely.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious.